as they finish the opening session, sorry. So good morning and good afternoon to all, especially our community hub in Nepal and our newcomers. I hope everyone is well despite the challenges you're facing today. Before I start, quick housekeeping rules. Please use the chat forum or raise your hand if you have any questions. We also have live transcription and also captions available for you. If you have any issues, reach out to the co-host and they can help you directly. So this morning or afternoon, we had an interesting opening ceremony and plenary. We had some great speakers and it was good to see familiar faces. The COVID-19 has shown the internet is not just a luxury, but a lifeline. And this is why meaningful internet access and affordable access to devices is imperative, especially in this day and time. And it's not just about COVID, but some countries are constantly affected by natural disasters. Today, we are going to address the key issues of closing the digital divide. We're going to learn how organizations and individuals in Central Asia are helping children and youths living in remote and rural communities deal with challenges in education posed by COVID pandemic. And then we will welcome you to share your experience and knowledge on how you are coping during the pandemic and what perhaps you could talk about in terms of opportunities you're providing to the children to ensure that they remain connected and have access to affordable devices and content. On this note, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for joining today because Central Asia is underrepresented in the Asia Pacific IGF Forum. So we are hoping this would be a great opportunity to bring in amazing experts from Central Asia to talk about the real life situation in their countries. So without any further ado, let me invite our panelists. If you could please switch on your video. We have with us today from Russia, Yulia Sarviro, who is the Senior Project Manager. She works for the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs in Russia. It's a civil society. We have Maria Novkovic, Chief Operating Officer for the GIGA Initiative in UNICEF. It's an intergovernmental organization. Talan Sultanov, Chairman, Internet Society, Kyrgyz chapter. He's from Kyrgyzstan. Again, another civil society. And we have Gulnaz Kordonova, who is the CEO, co-founder for Connect Eds KZ, Kazakhstan. So without any further ado, let me just kickstart with some of the questions. I know people are joining. Hopefully, if you are joining just now, we have some housekeeping rules, so keep your mics mute if possible, and also raise your hand and use the chat form if you have any questions. Okay, so over to our panelists. Could you highlight some challenges faced by children and youths in remote and unconnected communities who don't have meaningful connectivity during a pandemic? And then maybe talk about some of the opportunities provided by you as an individual or through your organization, or even some of the projects that you're working on to connect the children in rural communities. And please feel free to share examples from the projects that you're working on. So we'll start with Yulia.
Thank you, Anju. I would say a couple of words to clarify the work that our organization does globally. Actually, the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs is an international nonprofit organization, and it is based in the US, but I am personally based in Russia, and I'm trying to bring the work that our organization does to our region. The organization was created in 2006 when the Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities was created. And our focus is specifically on the topics of digital inclusion in broad sense. It covers anything that is related to the inclusion in the digital world. And it actually deals not only with technical issues, but also with the issues of the human rights. And here, when we are talking about the access to education, access to information, access to the connectivity overall in the world, and especially in remote areas, we see that it is absolutely impossible without the technology. So it brings us to the question of what digital is and how important the digital world becomes. But what we see through a lot of our researchers in different industries and different areas is that technology itself sometimes makes the situation worse, not better. And because for some groups of people and children in particular, it creates not the new opportunities, but the new obstacles when those technologies are not accessible. And when I'm saying about accessibility, I'm meaning the technologies that are accessible to all, including persons with disabilities and older persons. In our case, we are talking about children with disabilities. Even if the technology is provided to the area where they live and learn, they might not have the opportunity to use that technology, and it leaves them far behind the other children who will get better education, get more access to information. And this is actually what our organization does. We create the tools and help the education systems, education authorities, governmental authorities as a whole to understand what the digital inclusion is, what the ICT accessibility is, and what they can do to provide equal access to technology to everybody. So I think I will stop here, and I'm sure that I will have more opportunities to explore this topic.
Great. Thank you so much, Yulia. Well done to you and your organization for making technologies available to all, including senior citizens and children with disabilities. This is so important. I'm going to now turn to Maria. If you could talk about the opportunities your organization is providing, and maybe talk a little about GIGA initiatives in the region.
Thanks, Andrew, so much for that relevant question and for the opportunity to talk about GIGA. It's a joint global initiative by UNICEF and ITU, which aims to connect every school to the internet by 2030 and every young person to information, opportunity, and choice. So two organizations came together, bringing their unique advantages to bridge the digital exclusion. And the scale of the problem is quite grave. We've seen with COVID-19, the level of disruption to the education system, unprecedented, has not happened at this level before. And quickly, overnight, remote instruction became the only avenue for kids to remain in the education system, to learn and to grow. But unfortunately, 2/3 of school-aged children didn't have access to internet at home. So being cut off from education in schools led to being cut off from homeworks being sent over email or social networking sites. In that way, digital exclusion became the new face of inequality, and that's something that concerns us. And as a result of this learning crisis, UNICEF and ITU have created this initiative. We really only do 3 things. Andrew, we try to map all the schools in the world because no one even knows how many schools there are. We try to understand their connectivity status so that we can understand where connectivity gaps are. That's one. Number 2, we're trying to finance school connectivity by layering public and private financing to de-risk investment, to bring capital to the edges, to make sure that even the most remote, the more faraway school is connected, so that providers don't just go about connecting the lowest hanging fruits. The third thing that we do, we aggregate demand because the project is so rich in data. We aggregate demand and we're able to assist governments to structure common connectivity bids, ultimately secure connectivity for schools, but also bring the price down through these more encompassing bids. I do have to say to everyone on this call that GIGA is not a digital education project. That's not what we do. There are other partners who are far better suited at doing that, but we like to say that we're building a railroad. We're creating infrastructure for all other partners to come in and deliver easily their supplies, be it world-class digital learning solutions, be it teacher training, skill building, entrepreneurship programs, youth empowerment, you name it. The connectivity infrastructure that we would build would be beneficial to all, and we often say that achieving universal connectivity can be considered SDG 0 because it's such an enabler of progress. And I'll talk more later on about some of the specific connectivity pilots that we are currently conducting in Central Asia in particular, including Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, to maybe dig deeper and explain why we focus not just on school connectivity, but also on sustainable business models so that the benefits of connectivity extend beyond the individual learner.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. Being cut out from education is a big concern, but I'm glad that the GIGA project is making a difference. It's really important to map out all the schools in the world. So that's key. And having the cross-sectoral approaches is important, especially having finance and making sure that the infrastructure is already set up for these initiatives. So thank you so much for that. I will invite you and Yulia to please share the links on the chat forum so people can find out more about your work. Now we'll go to Talent. Talent, maybe talk about the initiative in Kyrgyzstan and also, mention about the great community work that you're doing, especially the donkeys. Don't forget that.
Thanks so much, Anju, for this opportunity. And it's great to be part of this wonderful panel and to have so many participants. I come from a country which is very similar, I believe, although I've never been to, similar to Nepal. It's a landlocked, mountainous, small country. And you can see in the background is the area of Zardali. It's a very remote village in the country. These are the types of areas where we do our work. And in this part of this present intervention, I'd like to maybe highlight 4 challenges that we identified and how we are trying to address these challenges in Kyrgyzstan, and hopefully this experience would be useful to our colleagues who are on this call. First challenge that we are trying to address is the connectivity issue. This became especially acute during pandemic, and we have about 2,300 schools in the country. And the government of the Kyrgyz Republic said that we can connect all the schools of the country to the internet, but there are about maybe 20 schools which are located in extreme locations which we cannot connect. And this issue we took as personal challenge to our organization. We decided that we should take the most difficult location and connect it to the internet. And if we can do it as a small NGO, then it should be possible to connect all other schools. And this is how we came to the village of Zardali. You can see in this photo in the background. This village has no roads, no TV, no radio, no electricity. And we came to this village with the internet connectivity. We brought solar panels, and this work is still ongoing. And maybe later on, I can share also that maybe it would seem easy to connect these villages, but it actually has some unexpected issues to deal with. So community networks is one thing that we do, is we connect communities to the internet. Second, what we found out is the issue with the availability of devices. So even if your village has access to internet, the schools, the households would not have computers to use the internet resources. So we tried to address this issue with the device, what we call Ilim box, and I have you cannot see it because it's through the background, but it's a small box. It's internet in a box that we brought to over 150 schools around the country. And you don't need to have a computer, you just need a smartphone. You don't need to have access to the internet. Through your smartphone, through your tablet, you can get access to all the content which is inside this internet in the box. And the very first village where we brought it was this village of Zardali. And because this village has no electricity, although the device itself is very small, we had to bring very large solar panels to power this device. And thus, came the help of local, little donkeys that helped us carry these solar panels through this very treacherous mountain, narrow passes. And it's not any donkey that can cross these areas. It has to be local animals who are trained and who are not afraid. Otherwise, it's so easy to fall off to the cliff. So this is the famous donkey that's been helping us a lot. A third challenge that we encountered was the deficit of content in the local language. So if our internet in the box, which we call Ilim box, has 2 terabytes of hard disk, we could only fill it by 1/3. So 2/3 of it is empty because there is not much local content. So we started to work a lot on digitizing educational materials, ebooks, collecting what's already been available, like Khan Academy in Kyrgyz language and Wikipedia in Kyrgyz, so that kids in rural areas could have access to it. And the last challenge that I wanted to mention in this part is how during the pandemic, all the schools, all the teachers had to switch to online teaching mode. And because it happened so quickly, teachers just transposed the traditional way of teaching to online version, right? So it's 45 long videos, and it's really hard to get children's attention to these videos which are shown on TV. So we try to kind of now modify or develop a content which would be engaging to the children and actually delivering this content through channels that children actually use. So we are doing TikTok videos, we are mastering the social networks like Likey. These are very unfamiliar things to me, but luckily I have children who teach me how to use this, and we hope that through this we can reach more and more children. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. I love the internet in the box and community network that you just mentioned. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of regulatory challenges, which I think we can talk about later. But honestly, thank you for connecting the communities in the mountains. When we talk about connectivity, there's lots of communities with electricity challenges. And as you said, the donkeys are very important and they have special skills too. Unfortunately, in Fiji, we don't have donkeys, but we have horses carrying equipment. So now I'm going to turn to Gulnaz. You are doing amazing work with connected.kz. Please talk about your great initiative.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for sharing your stories. It's really inspiring to see that we are doing the work all across the world. And so as you all know, and like other speakers mentioned, last year was very challenging. And in Kazakhstan, there was the prior existing educational equity between cities, regions, and the villages of Kazakhstan. And we were trying to work on the project that will help to elevate and help kids from rural areas to get the quality education. But since the emergency of the pandemic in March 2020, we had a briefing from our Ministry of Education, which announced that 300,000 kids in Kazakhstan don't have devices to connect to the internet. So we took that as an emergency call to help kids to get the devices they need, because it's a first and primary need to connect to the internet and to study remotely. So what we did is we started to collect equipment through our online platform, Connected KZ, and started to collect laptops, tablets, and phones from local people who have accessible devices, which were sitting in their homes. And we also started the crowdfunding campaigns, and we also reached out to the companies that actually renew their equipment every 2 or 3 years. And unfortunately, those devices are either destroyed because of the data privacy reasons, or they are just thrown away, which is not good either to ecology as well. So what we are doing right now is we are collecting equipment from companies, from individuals, and distributing it to kids from rural areas of Kazakhstan. So by this time, we provided around more than 200 equipment, which is more than 700 kids, because in Kazakhstan, the average household in rural areas, they have around 4 kids in average. So before they have to share one piece of smartphone or one equipment among all the siblings, which is very challenging, makes it challenging for them to study. But after we started to distribute devices, as Talent mentioned as well, we recognize that unfortunately our kids in rural areas, they don't have skills to use them properly. So, and according to ISIL's 2018 study, Kazakhstan was the last who scored in this test. It's a digital literacy test. So we started to looking for the ways how we can teach our kids to actually use those devices we are providing. So it's like they didn't have a book, now they can't read, kind of analogy. So we started to look for the ways how we can conduct the courses for them. Of course, we thought about doing Zoom conferences or some kind of live conferences, but unfortunately, because of the internet issue and also lack of the skills, it wasn't possible. So we went to the most easy and the most possible way to, so we started to use WhatsApp, which every household has in Kazakhstan, and they all have access to YouTube. So what we did is we pre-recorded very basic information on how to use a laptop on Google platform, on Microsoft products, etc. And we started to record those videos and uploaded it to open platform in our YouTube, and started to organize additional digital literacy courses for kids. But then we realized that actually not only kids, but the parents also need help with learning, because they are parents became teachers as well last year. So now we provide courses both for parents and for kids. So that's what we are doing right now. And we hope to become a very sustainable organization. So whenever like companies in Kazakhstan want to throw out their devices or renew them, they will think about us, that they can help both kids in rural areas and to the ecology too, by donating their equipment to us. So then we'll take care of it, refurbish it, and deliver it to kids.
Great, thank you so much, Gulnaz. You mentioned 300,000 children don't have devices, and it's so important to have affordable devices and also cheap devices. But you also highlighted digital content, which is very key. We have this challenge in the Pacific with parents, teachers, learning challenges, and also grandparents struggling to teach their kids. I think, this is great that you've mentioned this initiative. So thank you so much for making a difference in Kazakhstan, sorry. Talent and Gulnaz, please share the links on the chat forum if you could also provide more information so people can learn more about your work. Now I'm going to talk about, bridging the digital divide. In terms of meaningful internet connectivity, you've mentioned affordable devices. Some of you have mentioned digital skills. Think of it from a different perspective in terms of regulatory, technical, policy, and administrative challenges. Are the governments helping? Are the private and public sector helping? What could be ways in terms of how we can tackle some of the issues that you've mentioned? And think about a multi-stakeholder approach. We'll start with Yulia.
Thank you, Andrew. That is a very, very good question. Actually, when we discussed that children need additional skills, digital skills, that parents and grandparents need digital skills, we also should think about teachers who also need to improve their digital skills, because in many cases, especially when they have been working only with textbooks, paper textbooks for decades, it's very difficult for them as well to turn to the digital world and to understand how to use all those digital tools and solutions in education. And because our organization works specifically with persons with disabilities, we see that all the time, that even though some of the solutions, some of the technologies provide accessibility features, embedded accessibility features, there is a problem that neither students nor teachers know how to use them. And very often they don't even know that those features are there and that they are available from the box. And here you're absolutely right, private-public partnership comes into play. And what we try to do here is actually to help to build a dialogue between the public sector and private sector, between the government officials, government authorities, education authorities, and producers of the technologies. Because in many cases, authorities themselves in the education industry, they don't really know what questions to ask, what digital inclusion is, what they should expect from the vendors, technology vendors, what solutions and what features are there that can help to get more sustainable and accessible education for absolutely everyone, not just for kids with disabilities. Because as we know, all the technologies that were created at some point of the time for people with disabilities are very popular and widely used by persons without disabilities. Because anything that is built for the extreme scenario can work perfectly well for moderate scenarios. And it is very important to raise awareness among governmental officials about procurement of accessible technologies, because we know that in many cases, if the government or education ministry or education authority in the specific region procures some solutions or technologies for the schools for children, very often they don't have this clause about the accessibility in their request for proposals in the tenders, because it is something that is maybe the last item in the list of requirements. But it should be somewhere at the top, because if we require from the technology vendors to provide secured technology that will protect the private data and so on, we should require the same for the accessibility. And for that, our organization helps with building the tools. We actually have two specific tools for education authority. The first one is called 9 Steps to Procuring Accessible ICTs. And it provides the education authorities with the 9 very specific steps of how to start procuring accessible ICT, what they need to do first, how they need to organize the working group, let's say, within the education sphere, in the education area, how they should audit what they have already, what technologies they already have, whether they're accessible or not. What are the requests and requirements of the students and teachers? How many children with disabilities actually they have in their region or in their country or in specific place in the city, or even in one specific school? And what are the requests from those children and their parents? Also, how to engage with technology vendors, what to ask them, what questions to ask them, and what answers you would expect to get from them, how to manage the contract system, how to deploy those technologies, how educate and train the education authorities and teachers. All those questions are covered in that pretty short tool, I should say, but also to help to support the dialogue between the public sector and private sector, we also created the tool which is called Guide for Engaging ICT Vendors, which covers the questions of how to communicate with the technology vendor, how to ask them about their corporate commitment to accessibility, how to ask them about how they test the product, the solution for accessibility, how they support the deployment, and how they actually support you afterwards. Because in many cases, when they provide the solution, the technology, they step back and they've done their work. But it's not always the case, because the technology is very dynamic. It changes all the time. And teachers, students, education authorities, they need constant training on the new technologies. So I already seen some comments in the chat area about that connectivity is not all, that devices is not all either. We need training and awareness all the time. And it is the process. There is no stop point. We reach the goal, full stop. No, it is something that we do all the time, day after day. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. I also see some great comments and questions on the chat. Feel free to respond to the chat forum, but what I'm going to do is pause, because I like to have some interactive discussion. So maybe we can go to Sarai and Nirosha, and then we'll come back to the speakers in terms of responding, and also I'll ask a few more other questions. So let's start with Sarai. Sarai, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thanks, Andrew, for the opportunity. I just want to make comments. Thanks, Julia. You made a great comments about the education and awareness and the technology and the non-technology digital skills. I heard you mention digital skills. I think from the Pacific perspective, given that we so live remotely, from the world, and internet is one of the key medium of how we communicate. And with the pandemic arena we have now, everything moves faster from our perspective, from the educational perspective, in terms of providing or delivering our courses online. So with the technology available and the internet available, it's something that our partnership with our private and public sector should come with a common understanding that people involved in public and private sector needs to work together, so that transversing what's in offline to be online, so that everyone got accessibility. Everyone with the internet now. Before this kind of a forum, only 1 or 2 people go and participate or attend. But with the digital divide, with the internet and the hybrid format we have now, see, we are here physically and remotely because of the beauty of what we have with the technology. It's just that we still need education, we still need awareness, when to upgrade and how to make it better and make it safe. We need to consider cybersecurity. We need to inject cybersecurity matter in all activities, in all platforms, in all processes we have. And then, because we need to be safe. Because before we were doing face-to-face conferences, face-to-face workshops, but now all over the world, we communicate within this small platform, but it's very effective. For us, even though it's a total shift from the traditional way of learning and traditional way of delivering, but moving to the online, now our people are, are going to used to it. And I think this is where we're gonna live. And this is our way forward. Even though the pandemic or the COVID-19 is moving out, we're gonna live with this. So great. I think it's from us. We need to upgrade and make our self-awareness and educate our people. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Sarai. Nirosha, just before we start with you, I just wanted to just go to Gulnaz, Talant, and Maria. If you have any intervention. Maria, we start with you.
I actually would really love to build on what Sarai said when she mentioned the collaboration between the public and the private sector, but it also links beautifully to Julia's point about the need to look at connectivity, devices, digital education in a more holistic manner. There are some great examples of partnerships taking shape in Central Asia, in particular through Ginga and in our engagements with national governments. So we're really are conducting connectivity prototypes in that part of the world and enjoying some good discussions with partners. Just a story from Uzbekistan is where all the schools have already been connected, but we are fascinated by the idea of creating schools a connectivity hub. So we're now in discussions with the industry to extend the connectivity from the school to households in the vicinity, where the industry would agree for the school to receive a part of that profit from newly connected households. And that creates a sustainability loop, that means that schools are even, in a way, service providers extending their connectivity to their neighboring communities and getting a certain amount of profit that enables them to continue providing connectivity. A story also from Kazakhstan, where we are now currently working to connect 35 remote and unconnected schools, which will benefit maybe 22,000 students. And we're very close to brokering an arrangement where the capital expenditures and operational expenditures will be shared between Giga and the government, which is yet another example of a sustainable model where it doesn't all rest on donor funds or one-off interventions. What Giga is doing is trying to find optimal solutions for universal connectivity within a given country, but anchoring it around the school. In Kyrgyzstan, I'm so happy to hear Talant's stories. That's some of the things that he said. We would like to scale it up. So we have partnered with the Internet Society Kyrgyz chapter to come up with a playbook of business models, options that could be deployed in hard to connect areas, because we really are concerned with the last mile connectivity, and we'll continue working on that. I'm going to stop here because I thought there's more valuable discussion and input coming from the floor.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I'm glad that you mentioned last mile connectivity. Nirosha, I see you have typed your question, but would you like to ask? And then I will ask Gulnaz to respond to that.
Yeah. So I'm Nirosha from Sri Lanka. I just want to say, like in Sri Lanka, so there's there are two types of things currently happening. So there are students from government students, children. So in the moment, the teachers are refused to teaching online with some reason. So then they are getting disadvantages of these children. So, but private schools, they are teaching online. So, so that is a kind of a divide happening for children in our country in the moment. So that is a big issue in our country. Currently it is happening. But in the meantime, I have another question also. Like, so I'm feeling like, so some children are now get involved. Some children are get involved with technologies, these devices, and using much more devices. But some children are not getting advantages of these things because of lack of devices and all. So then I felt like, what will happen? So once the pandemic is over, so when they back to the school, then the teachers and the children are getting like more involved with the devices and all. So once they back to school, and when they are teaching and different method like face-to-face teaching, what will happen like? So I think we have to think about that aspects also. Then maybe we have to think change of our teaching methods or something like that. So we have to think about that. I mean, like, I have that feeling.
No worries. Thank you so much, Nirosha. That's really good intervention. Gulnaz, can you respond to that? And then I'll go to talent. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nirosha, for the great question. And I think, so digital divide and inequality is not something that happened over the pandemic, but it was happening, and the pandemic is just exacerbated the current situation. And unfortunately, as Yulia also mentioned, is people from low-income communities, especially kids with special needs, they've been those who are affected by the current pandemic the most. So the digital divide actually, started as a term like in 1980s, right? When there was a access to media, to internet access. So then it started to go to the questions of digital literacy. And we get this question a lot as an organization. What you gonna do when kids go to face-to-face? Are you gonna stop your project? But our answer is no, because kids are gonna need to use devices going forward, and this is gonna be the crucial part of their success. And unfortunately, as we all know, this pandemic affected all students. All of them have some learning loss at some scale, even those who had their internet and the devices. So that's for sure. There should be the ways of how we'll think on catching up on this learning loss, because in Kazakhstan, for example, Almaty region and Turkestan Oblast, which is south of Kazakhstan, and west of Kazakhstan, where kids from these regions were behind from their regions in Almaty already for 2 academic years. So we cannot even imagine how far they are left behind right now because of this situation. So definitely there should be more work on helping those kids to catch up. And there are a lot of studies right now that, because there are so many reasons, right? Internet connectivity, device, mental health effects of the pandemic to kids and their parents, and size of the families, etc., etc. So there are a lot of factors that we need to consider. But for sure, our lives not going to be the same. We will have to live with the effects of the pandemic, and all kids will need their devices to learn more. If before we will seek information from the libraries and etc., we're thinking those kids who we serve right now, they're mostly from middle school. So all of them, to do their proper research, to have more information besides the textbook, they for sure need an internet to get the more actual information. So we'll still continue doing this, and actually want to mention our partners who inspired us to do what we're doing. Close the Gap. This is a Belgium organization from Belgium, which started their work 15 years ago on digital divide. So they are providing their devices already for 15 years. So the work they started was way, way far. So I think this question is going to be actual unfortunately, for decades. And when we'll be able to stop our work, we'll be more than happy to.
Great. Thank you, Gulnaz. And I'm glad you mentioned mental challenge. And I think, it's a combination of everything, right? Dealing with mental challenge, but also having the right resources to make sure that people are able to deal with that, and also provide that support, but also looking at online safety. So I think it goes hand in hand to some extent. It's not just about one thing, which is connectivity, devices, giving them devices, but there's a whole package to it. Talent. Your work on community networks and Ilum Box, you've highlighted some concerns earlier, but in terms of regulatory and policy issues or any technical and operational issues, how did you tackle it? And what were some of the things that you did in terms of having those solutions?
Thanks so much, Anju. Very good question. There were actually some issues and challenges that we encountered during this work that we didn't think we would have issues with. So, for example, if we've connected several villages to the internet, and the last one was Zardali village, which for us took twice the time and double the budget to connect, just because the regulations were not flexible enough. What I mean by that is that we have same regulation for and policies for urban and rural areas. However, if you are a commercial internet provider, to connect urban centers to the internet can cost you not as much as to connect rural areas, and also you have so much demand, so the income is so you return your investment very quickly with very little, let's say, hassle. But if you need to connect villages like Zardali or like Susamir or like Nokat, which we've connected, you have to invest so much money to bring internet to these villages, and you only have 20, 30, 50 households, and the incomes levels are not that high. So for the commercial sector, it's really challenging to come to these areas. So if the government made, let's say, two-tier policy, saying that for the past 10 years, the government has been saying that there are areas in remote locations that we need to connect to the internet, but in terms of policy, it's as difficult to connect as it was 10 years ago. But just by, let's say, allowing license-free spectrum or reducing rent fees for renting light towers, so you can bring your internet cable, these small things could make a big difference, and all these villages would be connected by now. That's one. Second, there are also, not everything is up to the government. There are also some, let's say, issues related with the private sector, especially in terms of infrastructure and co-deploying. So I changed the picture on my background just to illustrate that you could see there are 3 mobile operator towers located in a very small patch of land. That's because they could not share one tower, and each one of them had to build their own tower. And plus, to bring the power supply, they had to get separate power lines to feed this, tower. So you could see that if you can regulate better the market, there will be so much better for everybody. In another picture, you can see poles. There are, maybe you don't see it very well, but there are 2 sets of poles going in parallel, and it's 2 cables running in parallel. So if the operators could cooperate, they could put their cables just on one set of poles, but no, everybody has to build their own sets to bring internet to the villages. And that makes it very expensive and very slow. Another issue I wanted to mention here is there is a big deficit of textbooks in rural areas for, which we thought would be very easy to resolve with our Elimbox device. We would just scan all these books and put them in the Elimbox, and everybody could have textbooks on their smartphones, but not so easy. There was an issue of copyright, that there were so many liabilities, and this was a very curious situation. Ministry of Education procures these books, but it doesn't have the copyright for these books, so they don't have the flexibility to use these books in electronic format or in any other way. So this is also like a Gordian knot. We say that to the Ministry of Education, why don't you get the copyright for these books? Well, they say, if there are mistakes in these textbooks, we become responsible for this. But if the copyright stays with the author, then the author is responsible for it. So then in the end, it's the children in the rural areas who suffer because they have no textbooks. And lastly, I think I wanted to mention here is, and earlier participants mentioned about it, is this issue of cybersecurity, personal data protection. When we connect to villages and remote communities to the internet, there is this, what I call, I guess, digital innocence. They suddenly get access to all this information and they trust it, they believe everything in it, but there is so much misinformation, especially in the, let's say, elections period, or there is so much, personal data that they put online, and that makes them very vulnerable. So we have to keep in mind that when we are connecting people to the internet, we have to also teach them digital skills. And I just wanted to mention one example here, not example, but illustration. In the Soviet Union, we had a very funny movie called a man from Kapustinsk Boulevard. A century ago, he would come to the Wild West and bring cinema, but he brought high art cinema. And at the same time, there was a bad guy who would bring all the bad stuff, bad cinema to the villagers. So when I think we have to be responsible as people who connect people to the internet to make sure we bring the good content and help people defend themselves from the bad content. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Talan. Don't worry about the time because we started a bit late, so we'll give a few more minutes. Going to, I think, Ashirwad, did you have your hand up? Would you like to make an intervention or a question?
Yes, Anju, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Ashirwad from Nepal, and I'm president of Educating Nepal. For the past 12 years, I've been working on providing education to rural parts of Nepal. After the COVID, everybody was working on how digital education could be the next thing. And I think now we're sure that the next step for education industry would be a blended learning system when we get back to normal. So my question to the panelist comes from this term that when we move towards the blended learning system, we still have some kind of problems like, as I shared on the chat box, it was seen that, there is limitation of devices as parents had to work from home and children had to study from home. And it was seen in some cases that sons were given priority. And this came not from perspective from friends from Nepal, but actually I heard it from somebody from UK. So my friend from UK was bringing in this topic when we were discussing before. So even in developed countries like UK, this kind of problem exists. And in developing countries like Nepal, there are other kind of problem. For example, my parents know how to use computers well. So for me, it's easier as a children, it's easier for me to learn in this digital world. But there are people who are first generation users of computer and they have to go to this class and their parents know nothing about. So they are still, so the divide is increasing. So what can we do as a forum, as what do you have as a panelist, or what can we discuss to decrease this gap when we move towards the blended learning system? Thank you. That's what I wanted to intervene or ask.
Great, thank you, Ashirwad. Yulia, can I go to you first? Do you have any response to that?
Yes, Sanju, I will try to. Thank you for the question, Ashirwad. I don't think that I have the good answer for the first question about the disparities in terms who gets the access to the device first, boys or girls. That's I would agree that it is a big cultural problem, but I think that I am a bit more informed about the second question. I know that many big companies, technology companies, international technology companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Facebook, they all have programs that are dedicated to the digital literacy in general terms for the general population. And specifically at some point of the time, at least I know exactly for Microsoft, there was a program that was directed to adults, to learning adults digital skills, to make them feel comfortable in the digital world. And this was done through the community centers of different types. This could be the libraries, this could be the community centers in a village or a town. These could have been the learning centers, but these services, these courses were provided to them for free so that they can learn the digital skills, they can start using them in their day-to-day life, but also they could start using them for their employment, for the new employment opportunities, because I'm pretty sure that in all the countries of the region, there are a lot of people who are losing the work, losing the job because of the pandemic or because of some other economic reasons or political reasons. And they are facing the situation that to find something new, to find a new way of life, new work, they need to have the digital skills. And here, this public-private partnership is of imminent importance. Luckily, many big companies understand that this social corporate responsibility brings them to this topic, and they are willing to help not only kids, but also adults.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. So in the essence of time, I think we've got another 5 to 6 minutes. I'm going to allow 6 to 7 because we started late. Maybe Talan, Gulnaz, Maria, if you could just share some thoughts, your last words in terms of cross-sectoral approaches, or how we can work together, or what is it that we're looking at in terms of the future if we were to connect the last 4.1 billion. Just any thoughts before we wrap up? We'll start with Talan. Talan?
Okay, I'll start. Maybe I'll follow up on the earlier question on the blended learning, and also what you asked, Anju. So what we realize now is that, of course, eventually internet will come to every village, and eventually there will be available content online. But still, we are not sure that this could replace the physical teacher and student interaction. But what we could do is actually help, first of all, not just students directly, but we should also work, and we do work with teachers, helping them kind of get the digital skills and know the new ways and learn the new ways of delivering educational materials to children. So it's becoming like a hybrid format. So we're training teachers in rural areas now to produce videos and tests and online educational materials, which are very interactive. And these materials would be like a substitute, or not substitute, but additional materials. If a student, for example, misses a class, or he or she is sick at home, she can then connect to these resources and catch up with their classmates. Or if somebody wants to get a deeper knowledge of languages, or of programming, or of arts and sciences, and all of this we are now putting together in a new project, what we are calling Ilimbox 2.0, and I pasted the link to it. It's an online educational platform for all the secondary schools, starting from grade 1 to 11, broken by the semesters. So any class you want, any lesson you want to kind of catch up, you could go and learn these materials there as an additional resource. But I think but it's my personal view, there is still no way to replace, I guess, face-to-face interaction between teachers and students. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Talan. Gulnaz.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I just want to highlight the, obviously I'm biased, but the importance of the grassroots initiatives, and the importance of the working with the community, not for the community, but with the community, and actually listening to their needs. So like what we're doing right now is we have our set goals, but we always are ready to listen for parents and kids what they want. So, and then being this bridge between companies, between government, and letting them know what actually kids and parents need. So just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Maria, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll be really brief, being cognizant of the time. I really invite everyone to go on projectconnect.world to see the live map of school connectivity and the connectivity status. This is an open source digital public good, so you're welcome to use it. What we are conceptualizing it for is to be able to conduct evidence-based data-informed procurements. We're also using this platform to go into the field of smart contracts, automate payments to internet service providers, which leads to more transparency, more accountability, optimum use of resources. So let's really focus on data-informed work so that we can achieve universal connectivity.
Great, thank you so much, Maria. Julia.
I just want to say that it is a very complex topic, the one that we discussed today. And as we see from the chat, there are a lot of items, a lot of issues around it. It's not only about connectivity, not only about devices. It is not only about training, but there are also cultural aspects and the trust aspects. And there are a lot of items here that we need to take into account when we plan for the future. And we all know that the future is going to be with the devices and with the connectivity. This will not go away, and we need to learn how to live in this new world.